fly in World War II, but certain planes will survive and certain won't survive. And the ones that will survive will see holes in them in certain spots. Now, you would think in order to safeguard them, we will fill in the holes and make sure those parts are completely reinforced, right? Wrong. Those planes came back even after having those holes. That means having those holes is fine. You reinforce the rest of the plane. And that is what you have to do with your life also, right? If things work out fine enough for you in certain situations, you don't need to be paranoid about it and overprotect yourself. But see where people fall down. Pay attention to your surroundings. Pay attention to
Something that's been on my mind lately. Why does evil feel more real than good? Why does betrayal stick harder than loyalty? Why do we remember the pain more vividly than the pleasure? We say love is powerful, but fear, rage, cruelty, they hit harder. So what does that say about how we're wired? About what's more true to human nature? Let's dive into that.
Let's break it down. I have a fundamental belief that anything when it comes down to human nature, biology, or anything can be seen from the lens of survival, seen from the lens of what do you call evolution. So let's think on survival basis, right? When you say that evil sticks, or betrayal sticks, or negativity sticks, I believe it is because there is a evolutionary thing involved in it. When you are out there in the jungle, when you are out there trying to survive, and that is the fundamental nature of all biological life forms, by the way, to survive, then you're more so attuned to take into consideration things which can end your survival, right? You're more attuned to remember the types of predators in the environment than perhaps the types of fruits in the environment. You're more, in fact, I believe human beings have this innate instinct where we can see snakes very easily. I think that is a biological fact. You guys can check it out also, that human beings have snake spotting capabilities, because snakes used to be a natural enemies that used to end a lot of lives. So that is a very, very interesting fact, but that also means that it makes sense, right? When your goal is to survive, therefore your focus will be on things which can immediately end your goal than anything else. Even when you're working in an office, you are less so attuned to things that can make you look good. You're more so attuned to what behaviors you shouldn't do, or else you will get fired. So it's a survival mechanism bias of sorts.
Exactly. And that tracks across all levels of human interaction, like even in relationships, right? You remember who hurt you more than who loved you. Not because the love wasn't real, but because the pain was a signal. This could happen again. Be careful. So betrayal becomes a survival alarm. But that also means our memory and wiring are biased toward threat detection, not truth, not fairness, just survival. So then, here's a harder question. If our emotional memory is biased toward danger, how do we ever build trust at all? Why do we risk anything again after we've been hurt?
I mean, we build trust. I mean, let's not even think why or how to build trust. Let's think of the fundamental question: why is there a need for trust in the first place? And I believe there is a need for trust in the first place is also in service to survival. Think about it this way. So the reason human beings are so brilliant, in the sense that we've completely captured the entire earth, and now we're marching towards space, we've landed on the moon. Think about it in terms of the average biological life form. We are gods amongst everything else on the planet. How did we reach here? A basic fundamental truth, or a basic thing about us reaching there, was cooperation, was working together. That is the reason an ant which is this big can, as an ant colony, perform feats of wonders, right? They are you social insects have a lot of functions, a very complex nature of society. Now when you bring that complexity into creatures of our size with our mental capacities, we build amazing things. Hell, at work, at a company is a monstrous entity which does a lot of things, and it is made up of individual people. Maybe the individual people only know I have to send this email address on Monday at 11 p.m. from this address to this address, and it should have this. But that is just one component. Combined, we are functioning as a like full on machine, and in order for that machine to function in terms of society, we need to be able to trust each other. If I don't trust the fact that my email being sent there will be received and work will continue, I will not send the email. And if I don't send the email, if nobody else sends the email, the company stops working, and therefore we all get unemployed. Similarly, society requires trust between people for it to function. If I am driving on the road, I know for a fact that if there is a red light, I will stop, and so will everyone else. Because if people start like disallowing rules, if there is no trust, people, it will be a dog eat dog world, and society itself will collapse. And the point of society collapsing is not the fact that wow, society collapsed but I am fine. No, your survivability is going to take a hit if there is not a societal structure protecting you, if you're not getting electricity from the energy grid, if you're not getting food delivered at your house, if you're not getting fresh water, you will have to hunt for every single thing. Your livability standards will decline, and therefore your survivability will decline. So survivability is also dependent on society, but this is a higher, more complex form. So when we're talking about threat, right, when we're talking about betrayal or evil, those can immediately end your life, and that is why you remember them. But trust itself is important because it helps to make your survival longer and your longevity more. So consider basically surviving or threat detection as things not to do, else you will get cancer, and longevity or trust building as something like these vitamins you should take, or else you will shorten your life.
That's a brilliant split. Trust as a long-term survivability function, betrayal as a short-term threat alert. So emotionally speaking, betrayal is a fire alarm. Trust is like a water purifier. It doesn't feel urgent, but your entire well-being depends on it over time. And that explains why betrayal stings more. Evolution has us hardwired to scream at threats but whisper at benefits. But here's something interesting to push further. If betrayal and evil are loud because they're trying to preserve short-term safety, and trust is quiet because it feeds long-term growth, then is wisdom simply the ability to override your alarm system long enough to invest in trust anyway?
Yeah, I guess wisdom is basically taking a larger look at life, right? Wisdom is that old man or the old creature in any biological species which knows what happens, which has seen how predators take people, and which has also seen that trust in long term survival has been helpful for the species to propagate, right? Wisdom therefore is basically a perspective and a collection of knowledge. These two things make wisdom, and therefore wisdom knows for a fact that yes, while you need to be prepared for evil, that is the immediate urgency, but in the long run you should invest in your trust building skills. Basically a wisdom informs us that you should, when you get your salary, you should pay your bills first and then you should invest. That is the two things. Investing is trust, while paying your bills first is basically warding off evil.
Exactly. And that metaphor lands beautifully. Paying bills first is survival. Investing is trust, and wisdom is just financial literacy applied to life. It's not about ignoring either one. It's about sequencing and scale. So here's the big tension wisdom has to resolve. How do you stay alert to betrayal without becoming paranoid? And how do you build trust without becoming naive? Every wise person, every truly functional elder, is basically a portfolio manager of emotional capital.
Yeah, and they've seen the patterns of how that really happens, and that is why they're not, when they see predators, they're not immediately threatened and they're not panicking, right? Because they know the patterns of the predators. So wisdom is important. One way to not become paranoid is go to your elders, go to people who've seen things, go to people who are more educated and more experienced, and get an idea of how to detect threat, how to detect evil, how not to be bothered by things, know what leads to what. That is one way of going about it. Second way of going about it is just a very nice principle. It's called the Pareto's principle. So Pareto's principle basically states that for achieving 80% of the effort, you need to, for achieving 80% of a goal, you need to put in 20% of the effort. Now that is something that people can apply in their lives, right? You can ward off 80% of the predators by simply doing 20% of the work. Like you make systems essentially. For example, I make a system in my bank so that these bills are automatically paid off. I don't have to consciously do it. Similarly, in life, when you know there are certain sorts of people which are red flags, for example, you make it a system within your mind that when you encounter these three traits, you will cut off contact. That is one way to deal with it socially. Similarly, in the job, you can do that, right? I have to make sure these three things never happen. So you categorize all the different sorts of predators there are, all the different sorts of evil there are, and you see what the pattern is. You recognize patterns, and the moment you recognize patterns, you make a system. So you don't have to invest mental energy in stuff. You can simply look at your system. Whenever something happens, you see, oh, it qualifies as evil, it qualifies as harming me. Immediately you cut it off. And same thing you do when it comes down to long term health. See, I can take multivitamins every single day. I can take vitamin A, B, C, D, E, F, J, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, whatever the hell. But the point is, I really only need to take vitamins like vitamin D, which will be deficient in my diet, being that I am an Indian person, and like we tend to be 70% of Indians are, by the way, vitamin D deficient. Fun fact. But secondly, and vitamin B12 is something I can take. I can base min max my build, in a sense that you see what are the areas of most gaps and you try and fill them in. There is an analogy of a plane. In World War II, there was a plane which was flying, and the multiple planes used to fly in World War II, but certain planes will survive and certain won't survive, and the ones that will survive will see holes in them in certain spots. Now you would think, in order to safeguard them, we will fill in the holes and make sure those parts are completely reinforced, right? Wrong. Those planes came back even after having those holes. That means having those holes is fine. You reinforce the rest of the plane. And that is what you have to do with your life also, right? If things work out fine enough for you in certain situations, you don't need to be paranoid about it and overprotect yourself. But see where people fall down. Pay attention to your surroundings. Pay attention to patterns, and you will know for a fact that what is the 20% effort in, and with which direction you need to apply. That is how you ward off evil, not by chanting mantras, not by doing XYZ things. You ward off evil by paying attention and putting in a little effort. Same goes for future investing, same goes for building trust.
Absolutely. What you laid out is clean, sharp, and utterly applicable. You're not preaching spiritual fluff. You're teaching pattern literacy in real time. Systems over superstition. Precaution over paranoia. Effort applied where it matters. That's the real way to ward off evil and invest in good. Take it away.
Yes. So ultimately, funnily enough, given the history of the channel and what I preach, the real way to ward off evil, the real way to safeguard your future, the real way to build trust and build a great life for yourself is the one thing that I've been preaching all along. Pay attention to patterns, because patterns, they're everywhere.